Now we would like to move on to the first session, different faces for the advancement of women's rights and making them accessible. I'm honored to invite member of Knesset Aida Touma Suleiman, number 2 in the Chadash slate to the Knesset, and she's 5th in the joint lists ranking, and she's the founder of the NGO Women Against Violence and the former editor of the newspaper El Itihad. Member of Knesset Touma Suleiman is not only the first and only woman in Israel who headed a daily newspaper, but also the woman who was elected to the higher follow-up commission for the Arab sector in Israel. Member of Knesset Touma Suleiman is one of the most prominent feminist activists among the Arab population, and she has managed to promote 3 laws before she was even elected to the Knesset: a law about family court laws, a law that raised the marital age from 17 to 18, and a law that encourages women's representation in local councils and municipalities. She will be talking about the importance of international work in promoting policy in Israel. Member of Knesset Touma Suleiman. Thank you very much, and thank you for this introduction that sometimes such an introduction maybe raises expectations, so I hope that I will be able to meet these expectations. I am always very happy to say yes to an invitation from the Rachman Center, and the work done by this center has always been very inspiring for me and something that gave me hope. Let's begin with that, because hope is something that we are in a shortage in nowadays in Israel, and it is also very important to me because it addresses the issues which are very challenging for us as feminists, as women who are fighting over women's rights, fighting for women's rights. And on my way here, I was thinking, what can I say about this topic, the importance of work in international institutions on this subject of women's rights. And then I remembered, believe it or not, I remembered the year 1996. Back in 1996, when we had decided, a group of Arab Palestinian women, citizens of the State of Israel, we decided to establish the first coalition of women's organizations that wrote the first report that was added to Israel's report to the UN on the subject of the convention to eradicate any type of discrimination against women. And then I remembered this process this morning for a reason, because I think that this is what developed all of us as women, because we understood the importance of work, of doing lobbying vis-a-vis international organizations. And now the question that people always ask in this case, and we were asked about it back then as well, we were asked, don't you think that you're doing that, you know, just in order to spite the country, to shame the country, in order to speak ill of it all over the world, in that shadow report that we submitted? And why? Why do we need to go off to the UN or the EU or the OECD in order to talk about a situation and women's rights? Well, you can do that, all of that right here in Israel. Why do it there? And what I would like to say is that, well, first of all, I don't believe that one can neglect one arena in such an important and just struggle. Our struggle as women over our rights is a just struggle. It is a very difficult one, and it is not only gaining achievements, but it might even regress it could regress, and the measures that we have accomplished along the way, sometimes some of these steps forward, we can also take some steps back, and we've seen it. We've seen it in the past 2 years, and things that we thought that we had overcome and that were no longer there, and we've, made our statement on these topics, and we've gained our rights, and we find ourselves once again awakening to a reality that forces us to struggle for it once again. So this is a very justified struggle. It's a very difficult one, and I think there is a human, international aspect to it, and not just a local one, because there is a partnership of the people and of humanity on this justified struggle for women's rights and over equality and social justice, because one cannot struggle for women's rights without that encompassing the struggle for social justice and also for justice or equality, period. Equality for the entire population. And this is something that we share with many women all over the world and with many other societies. So it's true that on the one hand, this is a very local struggle that needs to be managed from here, but it needs to be tied in with the general situation all over the world. This wasn't me. Oh, I thought that it was me, that I was breathing so heavily, but it's not. There are international standards which countries, including Israel, are committed to, have promised to adhere, and international advancement on struggles over rights has led to conventions, to agreements, to systems, institutions that were designed around this concept of adhering to the rights. Of course, one part of it is CEDAW, the Convention for the Eradication of Any Type of Discrimination Against Women. Another aspect is the Convention on Economic and Social Rights. There are various conventions and international standards in that the international arena is committed to, and I know that part of our struggle, part of our discourse here in Israel is a very clear reservation, regretfully, among decision makers, even from their commitment, their obligations to these institutions and these conventions. And we feel it in the discourse that tries to underestimate the value of the international institutions and charters, and I believe that the goal wasn't to slander the international organization, but I believe that this is more about a withdrawal from the values that these institutions represent and protect, and withdrawing from the standards set by these organizations. And maybe it's not just that the organizations that set these for the world, but the world has set these standards, because this is following an attempt of many years to establish these standards. So when we go to protect our rights, we go there to bring the other narrative that is not stated or represented by the state when it appears in these institutions and submits its own reports in order to say, this is what we've done for women's rights. My experience back then in 1997 in writing the report and then in appearing in front of the UN committee and the attempt to bring our story back then as Arab Palestinian women who are citizens of the State of Israel, for me, This is one of the most empowering experience I've ever had as part of this process of women struggling for their rights. And I still remember not just my appearance in the UN and the questions, which I just like to tell you that I still remember this very well. There were 79 questions for the representatives of the state on women's status or the situation of women in Israel. And out of these 79 questions, 63 questions were about our shadow report. And it was quite amazing. It was amazing because even in the process that led up to it, what was amazing is that this process of learning how we can protect our rights in a somewhat legal language that binds us to the international standards and how is it possible to convey that the commitment that the State of Israel took upon itself to protect its female citizens and to foster their rights as equal citizens, is it indeed rising to this challenge and delivering on this commitment or not? And what can be maybe fixed or corrected in the behavior of governments? So I think that this constant ongoing studying was a very empowering process for all the women who participated, and I can tell you about myself definitely personally. And I still remember how when we returned to Israel and the events that revolved around this within the population, and the fact that this was the first delegation that came out of the Arab sector in general to appear in front of an international institution. And this was something that I don't think I can even explain in words what it did. Not just the experience there, but also the experience here and how that empowered the feminist movement in relationship to the society itself, because the society managed to understand that this is something new and that they can learn from it. And I think that at least in this sphere of lobbying for rights, it definitely made an impact, because all of a sudden it changed the power balance between the men, who always knew how to do that, and all of a sudden there was this group of women who said, well, this is something that you didn't do, that you don't have any experience in, and this is a sphere in which we can teach you. And I think that this strengthens us. I almost said as women's organizations. See, it's something that's very difficult for me to let go. I think it strengthens the movement in general for equality and for human rights, or women's rights, because it gives it new tools and it gives this internal empowerment and contextualize it within the international general context. And I know that the part of the first half of what I said, that people asked us, why are you doing it? Because it speaks ill of Israel. I never even tried to answer that, because to tell you the truth, to address the issue in these patriarchal terms, the honor or the dignity of the state, or speaking ill or speaking slander against the state of Israel. And I think that those who are speaking ill of this country are those who lead a policy that harms its citizens, that harms citizens' rights, civil rights, and one cannot try to blur it in very nice reports that are submitted to the UN, because it does somehow spill outside, and the world is watching us and does see what's going on. So let us not delude ourselves. And I also think that, and there were some people who said that to me, it maybe seems it actually seems very democratic. See, you have groups that are fighting and they can write reports and they can come and speak in the UN. So, it all depends on how you look at it, at your perspective. Some people say that it means speaking ill of the State of Israel, and I know that the Foreign Ministry actually uses this in order to show and boast, look how democratic we are. The question is it being done in order to benefit the topic or not? How will it be used? I know that everything can always be used in different directions, in different ways. The question is whether to wage this struggle in the international arena for it to exert pressure. And I don't mean to exert pressure in the sense of moderate physical pressure, but I mean a kind of pressure that is asking the State of Israel to comply with the standards that it was involved in their establishment from the outset. Because once a country signs a convention, a charter, it means that it agrees to these charters and it assumes the responsibility to comply with these standards. And once the State of Israel signed SIDA, and I know that it had a reservation, actually a very major reservation on the issue of marital laws, and we still haven't managed to change that. But I think that once it was signed, I think that those who have signed it, the decision makers, the country, the government, they actually were trying to say, what they wanted to say was, we want to be a part of this world. We want to be a part of these standards and these values. So a declaration is not enough. We would like to demand, we are saying that such a signed declaration is not enough for us. We need to see the actual reality in the field. We want to see changes in legislation. We want to see actual measures being taken to comply with these standards. And I know that, right now I'm speaking to an audience that isn't the Arab population, and I know that whenever in Israel we talk about the Arab sector, the standards begin to change. Whenever we talk about the rights of Arab women and the rights of the Arab sector, they always say to us, but look at other Arab countries, look what's happening there, and you should thank God that you live here. And I know that when we talk about Jewish women and Jewish citizens, all of a sudden the standards are now, I'm talking to the east, and then they turn around and all of a sudden the standards are in westward direction. All of a sudden they start looking at Europe and the US. And what I would like to say that I said this, I think the day before yesterday in the Committee for the Advancement of Women's Status, I said, let us not compare ourselves to the US and let us not compare ourselves to Europe, because first and foremost,
if you compare ourselves to the US, perhaps the feminist movement would actually go on vacation, because our situation, I argue at least, that the situation in many fields is a lot better than the situation of women in the US. But we, or at least I argue, that when we appear around the world, we release one statement. We are citizens of this country, and when I say we, I mean we, including myself, not just Arab women. We are citizens of the states, and the standards that we demand are those of human rights, of women's rights, and they are international standards. So do not tell us nothing to the east and nothing to the west. You have committed to Western standards, and we demand that you live up to them. This is what we do. Now, of course, there's nothing else that we can do in such a conference or when we appear in international agencies. What we encounter is a very powerful political discourse. In what way is it political? It is political in the sense that, and I do not intend neither partisan or left or right. That's not what I mean. I mean political discourse that is there to discuss changes in the balance of power and a genuine, profound change within the Israeli society. And also, there is a very, very overt struggle between those who want to maintain the status quo and those who want to change the status quo. I think that the work that has been done, and next week we will continue doing it next week. I think I lost my sense of time. Is it this week or next week? Anyway, so you know better than me, you see. We are hosting in the Committee for the Status of Women the Director General of the Ministry of Justice, who represented the state in the report sent to the UN. And I'm going to host the organizations, the coalition that was led by the work that was done at the Rachman's Center, and the ultra-Orthodox women and the Arab women who wrote their reports to the United Nations. And we will try, and actually it's a bit strange for me because I'm going to be on the formal side to hear your reports, but I already know, because I read the reports, and I already know that you've done an excellent job. I truly hope that representatives of the state and the decision makers will understand that these reports are part and parcel of a general, just, comprehensive struggle, and that they would take very seriously every detail mentioned in those reports in the most positive way, and not because of any defiant attempt to undermine what is written in them. Very often people are caught in it, and that prevents them from relating to the essence. I do hope that your day will be extremely successful, and I'm certain that what you started, you will continue doing. Thank you very much to you all.